here we deal with once licensing requirements are determined and implemented, what do we do with existing informal entities? Usually, in an inclusive market or where the supervisor wants to develop an inclusive market, at the point that you have designed licensing requirement and are about to implement it, there would be some informal schemes, entities, and it is important to take a good approach to dealing with these entities. There are two main ways of going about this. The first approach is to formalize the informal entities. The second one is to create exit routes for those who cannot be formalized to exit the market. Now, let's take formalization, formalizing informal entities. Now, usually, this is a better approach than to shut down the existing entities, existing informal entities. Why is it better to formalize the existing informal entities than to just shut them down straight away? There are two key reasons. The first reason is that these informal entities exist to provide or to cater for some needs that are not met. There are needs in the market that nobody is meeting. That is probably why these informal schemes or entities are there. And so if they are just shut abruptly, it will just close the gap, close the door to these services which are needed. You may create gaps in the market or create a black market if you don't take care. So that's the first reason why it's important to seriously consider formalizing the informal entities. The second reason why it's important to formalize is that if you just abruptly shut down these informal entities, policyholders and other customers may lose premiums, monies they have paid to these entities. There will be casualties. There will be disturbances on the market. The shareholders, the policyholders, the staff, there will be losses, especially as in your role as supervisors. Your role is to protect the consumer, and so abrupt shutdowns may not be very favorable to the consumer. For these two reasons, it is important that the supervisor looks carefully at formalizing the informal entities. Where formalization is not possible or extremely difficult, or there should be routes created for exit from the market, and we will talk about that later on. But then how do we go about formalization? If we want to formalize the existing informal entities in the market, how do we go about it? So the starting point is to create or get a clear picture of the situation. So you have a market with informal operators. You need to gather data. You need to get clear picture of what you have on your hands. So you need to gather data on the existing informal entities. How many of them are there? How big are they? What form do they take? What kind of ownership structures do they have? What is the size of their businesses? What kind of management structures do they have? What is the scope of the activities in terms of product lines, geographical scope do they have? You need this information to be able to draw a good plan to formalize them. The next thing to do is to think through the desired outcomes. Now that you know the structure of the market, you know what you have on the hand, you have a good picture of what is there on the ground. Now you think through the desired outcome. What do you want to achieve out of this, and what are the possible means of achieving them? So there are a few possibilities. Do you want the small entities, or you could consider encouraging the small entities to merge to form entities of sizable sizes or sizable structures that should be able to or viable enough to pool risks and to have the needed resources to operate safely as insurance service providers? Or would you also consider encouraging these entities to transfer their risk portfolios to other existing insurance structures so that they can operate as intermediaries? It is possible to discuss this and to lay the necessary structures that may encourage the existing informal entities to transfer the insurance portfolios to some other insurance structures that have the needed resources, and then they become intermediaries. In that way, they still remain in the system, they still earn some money, they still play a role in the market. It's just that you've changed the kind of role that they play and to make the market stable and safe. The other thing is to also give opportunities for some becoming dedicated insurers. So that is why allowing diversity in the entities eligible for licensing is important, so that when you have to do formalization, there is choice, there are options. Those who want to become dedicated micro insurers can have the resources, the requirements to meet so that they can continue to operate. And it may be interesting that some of the informal schemes may have the required resources to actually be traditional or conventional regular insurers. And again, you systematically take them through the procedure for them to obtain the license to be regular insurers. There's the need, however, in that case, for transitional arrangements. Transitional arrangements are important because between the time the licensing requirements come into force and the time that they get to comply with them, there must be some transitional arrangement that will enable them to transit so that we don't create problems in the market. The first one is that the transitional arrangement should specify what can be done and what cannot be done within the transitional period. There should be restrictions on what can be done so that risks are not created, so that losses do not occur, so that appropriate policyholder protection is not compromised. The time allowed for the transition itself must be carefully thought through, and that should depend on the routes that we want to take to the desired outcomes. So if we want the small entities to merge, we need to allow enough time for them to go through what they need to go through to successfully merge. If the entities decide to transfer their insurance portfolios to other insurance entities, we need to allow enough time that will allow them to go through the necessary procedures to be able to transfer the portfolios to those other insurance entities. The requirement and the procedure should be very transparent, clearly communicated, and transparently implemented, so that we create trust and transparency, so that the system, the transition is seamless and smooth. And arrangements, the interim arrangement should not be unduly attractive as to create regulatory arbitrage, so that as we transit from the informal to the formal market, there will be level playing ground as much as possible, and the rules will be very clear and it will be smooth. Now, once we apply these transitional arrangements, those who can transit will go through the process to transit. Those who cannot will then have to create the necessary route for them to exit.